So let's get things started. We got a lot to cover today. So what we're going to do today, as you see from the title, is we're going to cover the getting started part of Lightroom 3. We're going to go over organization and setup, and then we're going to do some basic edits as well. This stuff is really important, and it's one of the things that really confuses people more than anything in Lightroom. And because some of it's not intuitive, some of you have really gotten it down. A lot of people can struggle with the organization and where are my files and how do I move things around. So since that's a really important part of it, we're going to spend a lot of time on that today. And we'll cover as much as we can in the hour allotted. So let's go ahead and get started. And as always, or as many times, you see with this type of webinar, this is sponsored by X-Rite. And there are a couple X-Rite products I'm going to use today. They're actually not really used. We're just going to discuss why, if you're not using their products, you better have something like it. Because there's some things about color in Lightroom that are a little different in Photoshop, so you really need to get that under control. So again, here's kind of the outline of what we're going to cover today. First, getting organized. This is a really big part of Lightroom, because if you don't think about this from the get-go, I guarantee you're going to have headaches later on, so you really got to get that under control. Then we'll discuss the Lightroom hierarchy, the whole thing with catalogs and folders and collections and images go and where they go and where you want to put them. Once you get past that mystery, that's one of the things. It's actually really critical to start, as I mentioned. When I actually started Lightroom, I didn't follow my own advice. Actually, I hadn't really figured out a clean way to do it that made sense to me. And what I ended up having to do about a year and a half ago is I took 2 days off of work and I sat in my office and I reorganized all of my image files so I could finally get things together. Now, even that said, I'm presenting to you guys today on my laptop, which I don't typically do much editing on. That lives on my home machine, which has got all kinds of hard drives on it. So even my laptop's a little bit of a mess with my catalogs, but I've got things organized for you guys today so that we can see that. I'm going to talk a little bit about color workflow because Lightroom is missing one thing that Photoshop has. It does not have a soft proofing option where you get to actually see your prints, how they're going to print before you send them out. So that said, Lightroom does have a pretty good rendering engine, but it really does assume that you have a monitor that's calibrated and profiled. So that's really critical if you're going to make color editing decisions there. And one of the things that can really speed that up or make that really dialed in is if you do use a custom camera profile for some of your images. Then we're going to go into the whole viewing, sorting, rating, prioritizing, how to organize sets of images from your master catalog. And then we're going to do some basic edits. There's a lot you can do in Lightroom to all your RAW files as well as your JPEGs. And then there's a lot more that you probably didn't think of that you can do. There's a lot of serious editing you can do in Lightroom that get very close to a lot of Photoshop functions once you know where to find them. And that's what we're going to talk about next week. So next week is going to be real serious editing. We're going to do a lot of cool edits. We're going to bring in some third-party plugins that you can access right from Lightroom as well. And then we'll discuss on how to get prints out of Lightroom that have the color that you were expecting, whether it be off your desktop printer or out to a lab. And as always, for those of you that haven't joined me before, my name is Joe Brady. I'm the Webinar Marketing Manager for the Mac Group. And I've been using Lightroom pretty much since it came out. I've been teaching Photoshop for 20 years now, and I always learn practically every time I open these programs up. And one thing that you guys can really help me with, and helps me learn as well, is your questions. So if you bring your questions in the questions control panel, that really makes it interesting for me, and it asks things that maybe I hadn't thought of, because as with Photoshop, there's a lot of things in Lightroom that it can do that maybe in my workflow that I just don't have any need to do. So your questions will help me that as well. Okay, so I mentioned organization. This is a really important part of Lightroom. You got to think about it right at the beginning. Now, Lightroom catalogs are in essence databases. They're where your images are stored, and you have to make a decision how you're going to create your catalogs. Now, part of it decides how many images do you have. Some people use a single catalog for everything, and if you're not a prolific photographer, then that's probably a good way to go. Me being a professional photographer and having studio work and personal work, etc., I have a different way of storing my images. For example, I recently backed up my image hard drive to a duplicate drive, and I saw that I had stored live 37,000 images. So trying to sort through all of that in one catalog will get kind of crazy. So I have a hierarchy that I'll show you in just a minute. So your catalog is a database. And I recommend that you create one master folder or even one drive dedicated to your images. Again, if you don't have a huge amount of images, just one folder. And then in there, you're going to create folders, subfolders from that makes sense. And we'll see that in just a second. If you don't do any of this on your own, Lightroom will automatically put everything in your pictures folder. So just to let you know. Okay, let's see. Just you get a lot of questions coming through. Good question. And yes, somebody asked about iPhoto. Your images in iPhoto also get in your pictures folder. So if you have a lot of images like I do, you're probably going to want to have a little more control as how you put things, because there's two ways we're going to import into Lightroom. One way is to copy all your images onto your hard drive first and then bring them into Lightroom, or bring selectively into Lightroom the ones you want there. And the other is to, as you're sticking a card in your card reader, to go ahead and import them into Lightroom plus copy them onto your drive. So let me show you how. This is my organization, and after we do this, we're going to just go into Lightroom because some of this stuff's going to be easier to see. Now, for those of you using different softwares, whether it be Photoshop or Elements or iPhoto, using Lightroom together with these other programs can get a little confusing. We're going to talk more about that next week, which, by the way, it'll just be next Thursday, the same times as today, 1 and 3 p.m. There'll be 2 sessions. That's where we're going to go into that about using it with other programs. So here's how I do things. Here's how I've organized. I actually have a 2 terabyte drive that is my images drive. That's where everything lives, and it is redundant. There's an automatic backup that takes place because you don't want to be losing stuff. So what I have is this, in that drive is a folder called Images. In my Images folder, I have 4 main folders depending on where the files fit. And there may be some redundancy as well, it depends. So I have a Jobs folder. Now in my Jobs folder are all the commercial jobs I do. Now, when we get into Lightroom, we'll talk about the catalog structure after these folders. What I'm talking about right now is having my images organized before I've even gone into Lightroom. So I've got those folders. Jobs locations are all the geographical locations I visit that I photograph for my landscape work, and they're just named after the place. Very straightforward. Collections are images that don't necessarily fit or might have multi-uses. For example, when I'm out shooting, if I see an interesting sky, I always shoot skies. So I have a folder in my collections called Skies. I have another one called Birds. In there I also might put my favorite portraits, my favorite wedding shots, miscellaneous stuff that doesn't fit anywhere, maybe commercial work, maybe it's products, things like that. So that's what go in my collections folder. And then I have a personal family folder because I don't want that mixed in with the rest of my work. In fact, that even has its own catalog. And then, as I mentioned, each folder has appropriate subfolders. Now, after you have this external organization set up, then you need to think about catalogs in Lightroom. And as I mentioned, a catalog is a database. Now, Lightroom 3 has made this switching back and forth between catalogs much easier. Prior to that, in Lightroom 2, it was a little bit kind of screwy. Now, you can only have one catalog opened at a time. So if you have images in another catalog, then you're going to have to export them out, which you can do now, which was a problem in the past, or you have to know where your images are stored and then re-import them into the other catalog. Understand that when you do all this importing into catalogs, unless you override the defaults, you're not moving any folders. Everything is staying exactly where it is, and you can have the same image exist in 100 different catalogs. It doesn't really matter, because all a catalog is is a listing of files that you want access to, and then it points back to where the original lives. And again, well, this will be easier to see when we actually get into Lightroom. Now, again, how many catalogs? For those of you who have a lot of images, so somebody mentioned, geez, Colin mentioned he has 169,000 images. He must have quite the callus on his shutter finger. Yes, having one catalog for that might be kind of crazy. That's where I recommend simplifying how you're going to have your catalogs done. And if you already have your images stored elsewhere, say they're in iPhoto, do you need to get them out of it and give it up? Stanley asked that question. So no, the answer is no. What you can do is you can create a catalog in Lightroom. In fact, I might even call it iPhoto. That's I haven't done it that way, but that's your call. And then actually import all those images from the iPhoto folder, which is stored in your Pictures folder. So let's continue on. Again, this gets a little crazy, so why don't we go into Lightroom now and take a look where all this stuff takes place. All right, so when you open up Lightroom, here I am in the library module. And I created a catalog specifically for this presentation today for you guys. And I've got things organized here. There's a lot to see here. If you're new to Lightroom, this can kind of be overwhelming. So let's just kind of navigate around a little bit. Now on the left side is storage. It's where things are organized. Folders is actually a list of the stuff that's actually on your hard drive. This is live. These are things that were already created on my hard drive. Now you see little pluses and minuses up here. Like I have this one images folder that's got nothing in it, so I can just click minus and it's gone. If I add or move stuff around while I'm over here, it actually happens on the hard drive. So if I create, for example, a new folder, if I want to add a new folder here, it actually it takes me out to my Finder. And by the way, yes, I'm working on a Macintosh, but if you're in Windows, it's exactly the same. Doesn't really matter. So if I wanted to create a new folder here, and I'll just call it test folder, I'm not going to put anything in it right now, and click on create, I now have a folder, and if I could choose that. And if I then come here, whoops, back to my folder, it actually now lives on my hard drive, and if I were to go exit Lightroom and look in that folder, that folder would be there. So anything that you do here actually takes place on the drive. And this is what I recommend setting up before you get started. Do this kind of organization. So I have all my images in images. If I double click on here or open this up, I can see I have folders in here. I have my Lightroom catalog folders, and then I have all of my individual image folders for this particular catalog that we're working in right now. Now, I know this can get a little screwy. Oh dear, wait a second now. Are you guys... Yes, you're seeing my screen because I'm watching my screen. If any of you have a frozen screen, by the way, do make sure, if that does happen, then make sure that just exit and come on back in, because that can happen if you lose contact with us. Okay. So as far as where you want to store stuff, be it an internal drive or an external drive, that's a personal call. That's how you want to do things. Me personally, again, with the amount of images that I actually keep live, yes, I probably have several 100,000 images stored on disks, but the ones that I actually keep live, I keep on, I have internal hard drives. I have a Mac Tower at home that has two 2 terabyte drives and two 1 terabyte drives. So I've got I can't even talk. Bleh. Sorry about that. I've got 6 terabytes of storage internally in my tower. And then I have several sets of 2 terabyte drives external to that. So everything gets backed up automatically. And one of the beauties of Lightroom is you can actually have that happen on import now once you figure out that file structure. So it's almost the kind of thing that I would recommend. Write it down on paper. Kind of figure out how you would like to get things organized, and then maybe organize things before you start to bring into Lightroom. And when you start to bring things into Lightroom, that's where we start to have some fun. So again, this can be a little confusing. Yeah, somebody mentioned, Jeff mentioned flowchart it. Good idea. So I've got my catalog here, and I had all my images stored on my drive. Now, and I imported them. And we'll import from the drive in just a second. But let's say I now have a new shoot, and I need to import some images off a card. Now, when you import an image, imported images actually live where you imported them from, and we'll see that just a second. So as I insert a card into my card reader, Lightroom automatically goes to the new import module, and it shows all of the images on this card, which is from my little Canon point and shoot camera. Now, I actually took a couple of images this morning on the way into the office, and I don't want to import all these. There's 380 photos here. I'm just going to import a handful of them. And you can see down here in the bottom you have check all and uncheck all. So I'm going to uncheck all. And I took a couple of shots of some barns as I was on the way in this morning. So I'm going to click on one, hold down Shift and click on the last one, and then click on this button, which checks them all. So that means that these 6 images will be imported. Now, when I'm importing from a card, I need to put them on my hard drive. You can see up in the top here, there's a couple of options. Copy, move, and add. Since these are on a card off of my camera, I want to copy them in. I actually want to put them onto my hard drive. Now, here is where they're going. So here, we're starting here, we're copying it. We're going to put it on the hard drive. But the default, again, as I mentioned, is the Pictures folder. I want to put it somewhere else. I want to control it. So I'm going to click Other Destination. And I'm going to go into my images for Lightroom for Passport. And oh, actually, here's the test folder we just created. You remember that one? Let's go ahead and use it. So I will choose that one. And now you can see up here it changed now. Now the images are going to get imported into that folder, Lightroom for Passport, the test folder. Now, there's also another really nice option here. Again, I'm just working off my laptop, so I'm not going to do this. But you have the option right here to make a second copy. So if you're mirroring your drive, you can make a second copy to that external drive, and you can click on here and tell it where you want it to go. So right as you're doing your import, you can automatically have a backup. So that's a really nice thing. Now, there's a lot of other stuff that's going on here, some of which I find really useful, some of which I don't find particularly useful. So let's just discuss those real quick. Now, file renaming I do find very handy. I'm going to click on Rename Files because there's some cool new options in Lightroom 3. By the way, most of the stuff I'm going to talk about is compatible with Lightroom 2 as well. However, this whole import thing is new. If you're still on Lightroom 2, I highly recommend you consider going to Lightroom 3. And Craig mentioned if he already has a drive that's mirrored, why make a second copy? If you have a drive that's already mirrored, then there is no reason to make a second copy. Just Lightroom, if you're not automatically doing that, Lightroom gives you the option to go ahead and make that second copy. Actually, I'm going to turn that off. So I can rename my files, and if I click on Template, there's a couple of new options here, and my favorite one is Shoot Name. So it makes it easier for me to find images rather than just have the file image number here. So if I click on shoot name and original file number, I'll give the shoot name. I'll call it Warwick Barnes, since it's where I live, and I'll leave the extension as is. And as I do that, so now what's going to happen is I have the shoot name plus the original file number, and you get a sample right down here. So it will keep the file number if I need to reference it again that way, but it also is going to add the shoot name Warwick Barnes to it, so that if I need to do a search, oh, where did I put those barns, I can do that. Now, the other thing down here is you can apply certain things during your import. One of them is develop settings. Now, develop settings in Lightroom are interesting because they're temporary. They're not actually applied to the image until you export it. So for me, unless you were going to go immediately out to black and white, and that's all you were going to do, it's here, but I don't know why personally, I don't know why you'd want to apply a development setting on import. It's easy enough to do after the fact, but it's there if you want it. Metadata, however, is kind of handy, and what I do is I have a standard metadata that I have updated for each year. And in fact, if I go ahead and click on Edit, if you go into metadata, you can see all of the items that you can put in here. Now, there's way more than anyone I know that's ever gone ahead and done this. But you can put your name, your copyright info, etc. So that's what I had done. If I just put copyright 2011, yes, it's copyrighted. Maybe I just wanted my name. So if I just want a really simple, that's all I want. I just want the copyright information in my name. And I could then save this, and I'll just call it JB Basic, and click on Create, and done. So now if I click on here, I can see my presets. And for example, this one has got a lot more information. The other thing that I highly recommend, and again, I know we photographers, I know there's this left brain, right brain thing. I know we photographers, many of us have had our left brain partially removed because we creative types aren't often that organized. Keywording is very handy though, and it will save you a lot of time later. So if I just put in a couple of keywords, I'll put the town, I'll put that they're barns. I won't put anything too specific. Actually, really, that's enough for that. Now these images are ready to be imported, and all this data will go with it. And it's going to be imported into that test folder that we created. So I just click on Import, and off they go. And here they are now showing up in the test folder, which you see right here. There's our images. Now if I look at our entire catalog, I can see the whole 380 images that are in here, and those new 6 just added. So now I know you guys have a lot of questions. I'm going to give you a little bit of an apology. I'm kind of riding solo today as far as answering questions. So I'll give you an email address after the fact, because there's no way I'm going to be able to answer all the questions as they come through. Especially since we have a lot of stuff to cover today. So yeah, somebody mentioned I could do Lightroom in 5 parts. I could. In fact, I was looking at my notes here, and I'm thinking, there's no way I'm going to get through all this stuff in two 1-hour sessions. But we gotta plug along. We'll give you a good basis. Fair enough. And also, if I might want to run over after the. Oh, someone, Joy asks a good question. How do you eject the card after input? How do you set it? It actually asks you. So what I'm going to do is, it already ejected my card. If I shove it back into the card reader, the import module will come up again. In fact, we'll go ahead and import 1 or 2 more. So, okay. So I'm going to uncheck all. I'm going to scroll down. Here's a couple interesting. Here's a couple of Savannah area shots. So we'll just add a couple of these. I'm doing a workshop in Savannah in a couple of weeks. So did a little bit of scouting trip here. Okay, so I want to import those. Here's where that happens, by the way, Joy who asked. There's a click right here where it says eject after import. Also notice that all my settings are where they were left. So everything is back to here. And if I always want to do things this way, I can save this actually as a preset. One thing I do want to change is this isn't Warwick Barnes. I'm going to call it Savannah. And I can save these import settings as a default. So it will always go to this folder. So I'll just call it New Import and click on Create. Because there's also a smaller version of this window right here. I can show fewer options. If I always know I'm going to want to import all of the images in the card, I can just do that. And I have presets here. You can make as many of these as we want. If you always want them to go to a certain place on a drive, you have the option to do that. And if you always want to have your shoot name and original file name as part of it, you can just save that again. It's just one of those workflow things that saves you time than having to go back and forth. Okay, so let me go back to my grid view here. So I've got these 3. So here's my checkbox that I do want these highlighted. By the way, also, as a default, Lightroom will not import images that are already there. So it will say they'll be grayed out like these here that we don't have chosen. So once again, we have eject after import chosen. I'll click import, and we'll just go ahead and add those 3 images. And they'll also end up in that same test folder that we created, which you can see now they're added here. Now, things like keyword. Someone asks if I'm just checking randomly. Yeah, for those I was. I was just picking a couple of random images because I felt like it. You can select them all. You can shift click and click on one and select them all. It's that kind of stuff is the same kind of selecting things that you do in any other program, any Photoshop or what have you. You can just shift click, or you can command click if you want to do them separately, or you can just click on uncheck all and then highlight them and go ahead and import them. Okay, so again, anything time you create a folder over here on the left hand side, anything you do here is actually happening on your hard drive as well. So this folder thing, be a little leery of, just understand what's going on, because if you do something here in Lightroom, it's happening on your hard drive. Alright, so we're actually going to close this for now. And we're going to import one other way. Now I can also go up to File, Import Photos, and choose, rather than use a card, I can actually import from a hard drive. And a lot of times I do work this way. Oops, so I click on my source, and let's say I'm going to come in and add something from my hard drive. Let's see, what do I have here? I'm not even sure what I have on this drive, so let's take a look. Actually, okay, here we go. Here's some images. And let me uncheck all, and just for speed's sake, let's see, I'll pick a couple of landscapes. We'll mix it up, landscapes and portraits. So, alright, so say I want to add these 4 images to my Lightroom catalog. In this case, what I'm going to do is click on Add. What adding does is it then adds them to the catalog or the database, if you think of it that way, but it doesn't move them because they're already on my hard drive. So if I originally followed that kind of organization setup that I mentioned at the start, if I've already got all my files downloaded into my hard drive. So for example, when I come off a big shoot, maybe I might have 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 cards worth of information. I don't import them all into Lightroom. What I do is I copy them into my hard drive. For example, I do a lot of workshops. So if I just got back from Arizona and I've got 10 cards worth of data, I'll create a folder in my locations folder on my image hard drive. I will dump them all into a folder that names where I was and leave them there. And then when I want to add those into Lightroom, then I will come here. Here's where I will come in and I will just click Add from my existing drive. And what happens is all of the files stay exactly where they are. They're not being moved anywhere. Now, some people do like to copy in your files as a DNG. Just to clarify, this is somewhat contentious. Do you need to copy your images in a DNG? First of all, a DNG is kind of Adobe's standard raw file. If you're shooting Nikon or Canon or Fuji or Olympus or whoever, or Sony, everybody has their own file extension. They're all different. You Nikon people are used to NEF, Canon CR2, Fuji's RAF, and I don't even know what everyone else is. Adobe has been trying for several years, somewhat unsuccessfully, to get everybody to standardize on a new raw file, which is what this DNG thing is. Do you need to do this? There are some advantages. It's a personal preference thing. Me personally, I shoot on a lot of different cameras, so I do like to have the original raw files because I may use a different program for tweaking them. Again, it's a personal preference thing, which is kind of a subject for another day. All I really want to do with these is I want to add these files to my catalog without moving them. They're going to stay exactly where they are, because if I move them or copy them, if I move them, it's going to destroy my whole file hierarchy that I designed at the beginning. If I copy them, I'm going to end up with all kinds of different iterations of my images all over the place, which is going to be a mess. So I don't want to do that. Now, John asked, do I use a folder for the year 2011? And for me, the answer to that is no. I don't do my things by year. My jobs get stored by job name. Now, I'm a little crazy with catalogs, and again, this is a personal preference, but I have a different catalog for every job. So if we shoot a wedding and that file has 12 or 1400 images in it, it has its own catalog. I don't want it getting mixed in with anything else. If I do need those images for use elsewhere, I'll just export them into another catalog. So each of my jobs has its own catalog. However, my landscape work is in one master catalog, and all my locations get separated out from that way. So how you do this organization, again, it's somewhat of a personal preference. So if you start sorting things around when you're already in Lightroom, again, you're asking for trouble. That's why I highly recommend you just sit down and think for a minute. I would use a piece of paper and figure out some kind of file structure, because then you'll be a lot more organized when it comes to trying to find things. So again, we're importing from the hard drive this time, but all we're doing is adding them. And what adding them is doing is simply telling Lightroom where these files are. Now, one of the other options that you need to decide is how big of a preview do you want rendered. Now, the default is minimal, probably a good idea. You can go even all the way up to 1:1. And what that really is it's a thumbnail image of each of these files. Now, if you bring them in at 1:1, you're going to start to have enormous Lightroom catalogs. The files are going to get really big. It's not really necessary for sorting out. When you go ahead and actually open an image to go edit, it will then generate a full-size preview of the file. But for imports, I highly recommend you stick to minimal. So I've got the 4 images I want. Oh, what the heck, let's check them all. We'll bring all 6 of them in. And again, they're going to go to where? Nowhere. They're not going anywhere. We're just adding them. We're leaving them where they were, which is in their home folder. That's where those lived. So I click on import, and all it is doing is it's adding them to the catalog without moving them, because they already existed on the hard drive in my correct space. So that is that. Okay, so now I've got all these images. So I can see here in my catalog, I've got 391 images in my catalog, and they're sorted all kinds of different ways. Now, this is where the organizational part comes in. So let me close the folders. We're really done with the folders now. I'm not going to mess with that anymore unless I wanted to start moving things around or re-importing. Now it's time to organize my images, and this is where collections come into. Now, just a little bit of navigation stuff. Again, we're in the library module, which is where we do our sorting. You can do some basic edits here as well. And we're also going to touch on the develop module today. But let's just go through a little bit of navigation here. We're in what's called the grid view. Now, if I want to look at one image full screen, I can just double click on it, and it goes to full screen for me. If I hit the T key, the letter T, that hides the tools which exist underneath, which in my library catalog are kind of rating tools and comparing one or more images, which is what these are. These are just shortcuts. This is the grid view, which I can either hit the letter G or click on here. This is the loop view, which is, I don't know, E, because you can't use L because L is lights out, which we'll see in a second. Now, Shift Tab is a really handy combination to know when you're in Lightroom. You might notice these little kind of diamonds over here, and there's one on either side. What these will do is temporarily hide, let me hide that again, temporarily hide the left and right menus so you can have a little more real estate to look at your image. And I can turn these on and off this way. What I find myself doing all the time is using Shift Tab, which hides them all in one fell swoop, gets rid of everything, and then I can hit T and get rid of my tools, and that gives me kind of a full screen view of my image. Now, the reason I can't use L for loop view is because L is for lights. And think of it as lights out, and there are 3 settings. One, the lights on, which is we see here. If I hit L once, it dims everything else but the image. If I hit it one more time, it blackens out everything but the image. This is a nice way for just to check to see what you're doing, or if you want to sort through some images before you decide how you're going to edit them. And again, Shift Tab gets your menus back, but since I'm in lights out, everything's disappeared. So I just hit L one more time. Now, as I'm sorting through, which I'll typically do through the grid mode, and I just hit G to get there really quick. As I'm sorting through, I can change the size of my thumbnails. Let me bring my tools back. I can make my thumbnails larger if I want to sort out. And if I'm doing a quick sort, now these images were all selected because I wanted them. But if, for example, I'm coming through and I decide, well, gee, I really don't want, oh, let's say I don't want this image. I do, but let's say I didn't. If I just hit the X key, what it does is it sets it as being rejected. That means when I go to do some collections, it will just disappear. And I can turn that on and off. Now, again, one of the things about Lightroom that is similar to Photoshop is there's lots of different ways to accomplish the same thing. I'm showing you a way that's worked for me. Now, when I'm doing an edit on an image, let's back up. We'll do that in a second. If I want to view multiple images to compare them, let's say I have, well, these two images. Let's use these two. I can click on X, Y, and I'll hit Shift Tab, and I can decide, all right, if I'm just trying to decide between these two images, which one do I want to use? If I go back to Grid View and I want to choose between, say, these 5 images, I choose this icon down here, which is the survey view, which gives me all 5. So I can scroll through these images and decide maybe I want to rate them. Maybe I want to change the color that I'm assigning to the label. Maybe I want to get rid of them and decide I don't want. Like I don't want that one because I already have one that I had already edited, which sits right next to it. And again, G brings me back to my grid view. Shift Tab brings all my menus back again. Again, this is just kind of navigational stuff. Now, but collections are what allow you to sort through your images and to kind of group them together for a common purpose. And there are 2 different types of collections. And you can see them right here. Under collection, there is create a collection or create a smart collection. Now, some people like to use their rating systems differently, and it can be anywhere from, you have 1 to 5 and you have different colors. Now the reason you might see different colors on mine, and again I did this just for visual purposes, what I did was I assigned images a color based on which camera they were shot with. And I just used the company's colors. These are all, you can see these all have a little red flag on them. These were all shot with a Canon camera. All the ones with yellow flags were shot with Nikon. All the ones with green was shot with Fuji. And lastly, all the ones that are blue were shot with a Mamiya digital back. So I do use a lot of different cameras, and there's a whole bunch that haven't been labeled yet because they were just added. Now, if I want to work on a series of images, I don't necessarily want to see all of these. So my first edit when I'm going through images, I'll typically assign a number 1 to them. Just so that means, okay, that means I want to do an initial sort on those. And what I can do is create a collection. Actually, I'm going to delete a collection here first because I want to recreate this for you guys. I want to create a new collection, and there's 2 ways I can do it. I can just create a collection and give it a name. And let's see, needs editing. So these are images that have to be edited. And click on Create, and here's our new folder, our new collection called Needs Editing. So if as I'm scrolling through, I decide, okay, I've got that one, I've got that one, and I'm just kind of randomly picking images right now. So let's say I wanted to use those 4. I can just drag them into the Needs Editing collection, and you can see those 4 images are now there. Let's make the thumbnails a little bigger. However, I don't create collections that way a lot because typically I'm going to do my sort. So I want to add that, I'll add that 1 star to images I want to further explore. So what I'll do is create what's called a smart collection. And these are really powerful and fun. So I'm going to call this one 1 star, ready for edit. And I need to tell it I want it to match the rating is greater or equal to, actually not greater or equal to, is 1 star. I just click on here and add 1 star. Then I click on Create. Now any image that I have assigned 1 star is already in that folder. So you can see here there are 39 images here that had 1 star to them. Now if I come back, and notice this number here is 39. Just remember that for a second, because if I go back to all my photographs and scroll down, in fact, let's go to those barns that we added. I'm going to change the rating on all of these barns to 1 star. So I'm going to go up to Photo, Set Rating, and make it 1 star. And now notice they all have 1 star. Now also take a look over here at the collections, and you'll notice that it just jumped from 39 to 45 because now all of those images automatically went to 1 star. Now if I decide this one, I look at this one, now I don't particularly like that image, it's not that good, so I'm going to get rid of it, and if I just get rid of the star, it disappears. It's still in my catalog. It's still in my master catalog under all photographs. It just is gone from the Smart Collection. So this is a really nice way of getting your edits under control by starting with this 1 star system, and then after you've made your decision to do something else with it, it will move somewhere else. So again, collections are sort of subgroupings of images in your catalog that get defined on how you want them to be placed. So again, they're virtual groups. Think of it that way. There's no copying, there's no moving taking place. A collection is simply a grouping that you've decided, and it's temporary. Nothing's going on. All your images are right where you left them. They're still in your catalog, and your collections can be fluid, as with this Smart Collections. Smart Collections are a really handy way of getting through these edits because you can make your decision that these are the ones I want to edit, and it just gets rid of, in this case, we have 44 in here. Well, there were 391 in the whole catalog. I don't have to sort through those. So again, as you change an attribute of the image, if I change a new image to a rating, let's say, for example, I want to have a 5-star rating for images ready to print. So what I would do is just create a new collection. I'll create a new Smart Collection, and I'll call it Ready to Print. And for that to happen, let's say I had the rating has to be 5 stars. And click on Create. And if any of my images already had 5 stars, they would have automatically gotten added. And as you can see here, this Ready to Print already has 26 images in it because these already were rated 5 stars. Once again, if I pick one of these and decide, no, that's not quite a 5-star, I need to work on it, and make it back to a 1 star, it disappears out of the Ready to Print collection. Danny had a great analogy. Danny mentions that collections are like playlists in iTunes. That's a great analogy. I'm going to steal that. So again, the difference between, another good question, Donna asks, what's the difference between a collection and a Smart Collection? A collection is a manual grouping. You decide you're going to create a folder and you're going to drag things in there by yourself without any kind of attribute. A Smart Collection takes a look at the labeling or ratings that you've done to the image and will act on it. Say, for example, let's do kind of a complicated one. Actually, I'm going to get rid of this this Smart Collection. We're going to create a new one. So I've got 391 images in this catalog. As I scroll down, I just was involved in this thing, a shoot called the Hudson Valley Click, and we had a bunch of models for the evening. And you can see them all here, and I haven't really done much with these yet. Well, what I want to do is put those aside for now. I do want to see all of the images that I still need to sort through. So I can make this as complicated as I want. So watch this. I'm going to create a Smart Collection. Actually, first I'm going to select all of these images from the model shoot. So let me scroll all the way up till I see my last one. So I selected the first one, and I hit Shift Click. And I'll assign these something peculiar. Let's say I'm going to make these, we'll make them purple. So all of these now I made purple. Those are all, so now they all have a purple flag to them, as you can see here. Also, I don't want to edit images that I've already assigned my 1 star to because they already have their own folder. They're ready to be edited. So what I'm going to do is create a new Smart Collection, and I'm going to call it non-HV click and not sorted, so not ready to be edited. And it has to match all the following rules. The rating is not 1. So that means all of those images that I assigned that are ready for edit will be excluded from this. And then I can add another criteria and say that the label color is not purple. So that means all of these images, if they have either 1 star or actually I want to change this from all to any of these rules. If it has either 1 star or it's been assigned a purple label, it will be excluded from this smart collection. So if I click on create, it automatically goes ahead and selects those images. So you can get crazy here with all these different collections. It's up to you how you want to sort them. But again, it just does make things very simple to keep things organized and to keep things that are organized in a way so that you know when you have work to do what's going on. Like for example, all these were assigned purple, but they already all had 1 star. So you can see all of the 1 stars show up, and all of the ones that are purple, it doesn't matter that they're purple, they just happen to be 1 star. And if as I'm scrolling through here, I decide, well, you know what, I really don't like this image. If I just click off the 1 star, and the same thing with this one, it disappears from the collection. Again, nothing went anywhere. So again, thank you for that analogy. A collection's like a playlist. And by the way, how can you sort? Someone asked, can you sort by keyword? Oh my God, you can sort by everything in Lightroom. By the way, if you're tired of a collection, if you just don't need it anymore, if I decide I don't want this collection anymore, I can just hit minus and it just deletes the collection. Again, no images were deleted, just that organizational structure. But just to show you how crazy your smart collections can be. Let's call it crazy. We'll call this crazy collection. It's going to have really weird criteria. So it's got to meet all of the following rules. The rating has to be 1. The label color has to be red. And I can also decide as much as I want. Here's a listing of all the things that you can search by. It can be a keyword. It can be even down to the serial number of your camera. If you have 2 of the same camera model, and it'll actually see by serial number. You can say, only show me the stuff that I used with a flash, or only show me the stuff that I shot at f8. It's crazy. Anything you can think of. These are all the things that you can sort by. So I don't know if I'd ever use some of these, but there's all kinds of criteria. One of the things that could actually be kind of handy when you're doing smart collections, you might not think, why would I ever want to sort by camera serial number? If you're shooting a job with multiple cameras and maybe you have another shooter who you've temporarily hired for the day or someone who occasionally helps you with weddings, and you want to just sort by their images, and maybe you're shooting a Canon 5D Mark II and so are they, by choosing serial number, you can actually put the camera serial number in here. So kind of crazy. Okay, so we've done a whole bunch of sorting. Man, it's already 10 of 2, and we haven't done any editing yet. And I want to do some basic edits. So you guys ready to go to that? I know there's a lot. We just went through a lot. It can be a little bit complicated, but really, if you start to think about it, how you organize your images from the get-go, it'll make things a lot easier. And by the way, all the stuff we did on import, the keywording, metadata, all of that, you can do that after the fact as well. So for example, if I click on that image and just down to say here, those images, I can add keywords here. I can just click on here. These were all in Sedona, and I can just call it Sedona, and I'll call it AZ Workshop, and that's about it. And just click on, whoops, I didn't want to sync the metadata. And now all of those images have those keywords. So I can then sort images by keywords. I can find images by keywords. So you can add it after the fact. And if you used keywords recently, it will present them to you. You can also create your own keyword sets. So if you're going to do a job, you can create your own settings. There's some in here I already have set, but you can go in and edit them. So you can get crazy with the organization. Generally, most of us photographers, again, because of the right brain thing, aren't usually that organized. But if you're a really super crazy organized, then you can organize things however you like. So let's get to a couple of basic edits, because we've got to set the stage for next week when we're going to get into some heavy editing. So let's see. Let me find something worthwhile. In fact, let me click on my 1-star ready to edit. Actually, I want to do one of those barns, so let's bring one of those up. Okay, so I double click on it and I get the image full screen. Now really, I'm not going to need this for a while. I'm done with the sorting organizing part, so I'm going to get rid of that window to give myself a little bit more screen real estate. Actually, I also don't need the sorter on the bottom. I can get rid of that too by hiding that. And I can even get rid of the tools, because I might need the tools because we're going to go into develop module. So to do edits, we want to do it there. Now you can do basic edits. You might notice there's a quick develop tab here, where if you just want to see if your image is maybe salvageable, maybe you overexposed it a bit and you want to see, well, what happens if I hit recovery, will it come back? So you can do things like that there. However, most of the time I'm going to do it in develop. I will use that quick develop if I have an image that's maybe way underexposed. Maybe my flash didn't fire off and it's really dark. Strangely enough, those images sometimes work. And you photographers know, what do you do with images that your flash didn't work? Yes, you turn them into black and white. You can recover a lot of data. It's going to get grainy, it's going to get noisy, but you can actually do that. So let's talk about some of the things we can do here in the develop module, the basics. And again, as I said, next week we're gonna really dig down into the editing parts and see some really cool stuff that you can do in Lightroom. For those of you that haven't registered for next week that you would like to, actually the invite's going out today. It might have just gone out. If you haven't gotten it yet, look for it. You will get it. And if for some reason you don't get it, we have had some email problems, particularly with Comcast and Roadrunner for some reason. So if you don't get the email, you can go on to x-rite-photo.com, and from there you can go under the Learning tab under Webinars and you can register. Ooh, one thing before I do any editing, I got to show you just a couple of PowerPoint slides first, because I mentioned before you do this, you got to calibrate your monitor. Lightroom assumes this. If your monitor is set too bright and you're trying to make those edits, you're gonna be disappointed in your prints. You don't want to guess. Real quickly, couple different tools depending on where you're sending out your prints. If you're primarily going out to a lab, if you're a wedding photographer and you're not doing your own printing, you at least have to have a colorimeter, which is what this is. This is the i1 Display 2. I really recommend this unit because it's the least expensive system I've found that gets monitor luminance under control, which is the brightness issue. And I'm sure many of you run into where you send out prints to a lab and they've come back dark. That's because your monitor's too bright. Getting the color is part of it, but you got to get that brightness under control, and this is the best one I've seen for the price. Now, if you're doing your own printing and sending out, and or maybe you're using a projector or a large screen TV to show clients your images, then I would recommend taking a look at the Color Monkey. Again, I'm not going to talk about these today in detail. If you're interested in learning about these in detail, I actually did Color Checker Passport yesterday. Color Monkey's coming up at the end of the month, so you can again go on to x-rite-photo.com and register for those. And I did mention the Passport, and I'm going to pick up with this next week, because the Passport is what allows you to create a custom camera profile. And by having a camera profile, all your color will be instantly in the right place. So the combination of having a monitor calibrated and a camera profile will cut down your color editing by a huge amount of time. So again, I'm not going to talk about those in detail today, just wanted you to use it. Now, if you're already using some other device to do your white balance, to do your monitor profiling, just doing something is going to make things better and more consistent, and that's what you're really after. You got to get that under control. So if you're using some other device and you're happy with it, great, continue to use it. if you're looking to upgrade, the two devices I showed you, the Color Monkey and iWin Display 2, are kind of the top of the heap for each of what they do. So if you're getting really serious about color, then take a look at it. And again, Passport for profiles, we'll talk about that a little bit when we start next week. Okay, so let's jump back into Lightroom. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the basic edits first. One of the things I really like in Lightroom is the ability to actually make adjustments right on the histogram. I can click and drag the exposure right on the histogram and decide, and I can watch to see what happens, which is pretty handy. One of the things I really like is when I want to check my highlights and the black levels. And if you hold down Alt or Option, depending on if you're on a PC or Mac, hold down Alt or Option and click on the, in this case, the black slider. Notice what happens as I drag left and right. You see where that shadow clipping is taking place. So you can make a decision on what you need. Now, if you're doing portraits or even landscapes and you're printing it yourself, inkjet printers actually, my experience is, prints look a little bit better with a little bit of pure black. So that's what would be happening there. If I'm sending out to a lab, I don't want any of that pure black. So in that case, I would just bring my black slider up until that stuff pretty much disappears. Same thing on recovery or highlight clipping. Again, hold down Alt or Option, and you can see, let me actually overexpose this for you for a second. You can see where the exposure issues are. Again, I'm holding down Alt or Option and dragging on the highlight slider, and I can drag the recovery slider over until that stuff disappears. So now I know that everything is within my histogram. So that is really handy. By the way, if I have a whole series of images where my camera was, say, set slightly screwy, after I make my edits, I'll show you. That's what this previous button does. It will take everything you just did to the previous image and apply it to the image you have up. It's kind of pretty cool. That applies all the settings. So let's take a look at just a couple of these tools right here. Cropping, again, very handy. And of course, the cropping shortcut key for in Lightroom is, no, it's not C like it is everywhere else. It's R, I guess because they ran out of C for something else. So if you hit the letter R, that brings you to the cropping tool, or there are keyboard shortcuts for everything here. So if I want to do a crop, if I don't want this little bit of the tree to show up. Another nice thing is as I bring up my cropping tool, I get a rule of thirds grid, so I can decide compositionally. Actually, this image looks fairly good with everything centered, so we'll leave it that way. And you have all of the tools here. It's set for a custom aspect ratio, but if I wanted to dial this in and I knew that this image needed to fit in an 8x10 frame, I can tell it that. I can say, give me an 8x10, and then however I move the crop around, it stays in an 8x10 aspect ratio. So we'll go ahead, we'll live with that for now. You can also straighten your images while you're here. And this is handy. Now in Photoshop, what we always had to do was bring up the ruler tool and find something that was straight. Well, if, for example, I knew that I wanted this ledge of the barn roof to be straight, not the case in here, but if I did, I can click on this angle tool and just draw a line across what I know should be horizontal. Now, this would be something you typically do with a horizon, but if I knew that that needed to be straight, just click on that and that will straighten out the image for you. So that's pretty handy to do. One of the beauties about the cropping is it's not actually cropping. It actually never happens until you export the file. Oh, by the way, guys, I see it's already 2 o'clock. I got a couple more things I really want to show you. Can you guys hang out for another 5 minutes? If you do have to leave, again, we'll send you an email sometime tomorrow with the link to the recording so that you can do that. But is it okay with you guys if I go over a little bit? Okay, thanks. All right, so here we have the crop. You can see we had the angle was already built in because I told it I wanted that piece of the barn roof to be straight. Typically something I would do. And then I just hit enter and I see that's really dumb because that wasn't the part of the barn. So yes, I just undid that, but that's what's there. Now this one right here is the kind of the spot healing tool. This is really handy if you've got spots on your lens, or even if there are things you want to remove. Now, I don't really see anything I want to remove in here, so we'll make believe. I'm going to click on the spot removal tool and tell it I'm going to use my right bracket to make a bigger size. I want to get rid of this little end of the branch. It's bothering me for some. Better yet, let's come right into the barn here. And let's say I don't like this piece of branch. So I want to get rid of that right little end there of the branch. So I give myself a brush. Now if I just click and let go, it will automatically go try to find a spot. In that case, that didn't really work. If I click and hold, then I can drag to where I want it to sample from and try to find something that's going to work better. And whoops, I just unselected my photo. Now in that, again, this is something that I don't think is the greatest way for doing retouching. You can see the remainder of the spot when you choose that large an area. If you need to do serious pixel-based editing, for stuff like this, you need to remove lines, etc. That's really something that you're probably going to want to do in Photoshop. The really heavy-duty pixel level editing is what Photoshop does. Lightroom's getting pretty close. It keeps getting better. Someone asked if I could remove the mailbox, for example. That would be a lot of work to try to pull off in Lightroom. This is something that you go into Photoshop, and we're going to do that next week, by the way. We're going to just take our image and go to Photo, Edit in Photoshop. Happens right there, automatically goes into Photoshop, and then automatically comes back. But again, that's for next week. Let's just go over a couple more tools. Red eye reduction, very straightforward. Again, I don't have any red eye here because it's not a person, but very easy to use. This tool, one of my favorites, the graduated filter. This is one of the greatest tools in Lightroom, and I use it all the time for many different reasons. If I just click graduated filter, and I can set where my midpoint is, I can set how big or small I want the graduation to take place, and I can, right now it's set to decrease the exposure a bit. I can lighten, I can darken, and again, none of this is actually happening to the file. I can make these changes, and it's never going to be applied until we actually export it. Now I can click on New and have another one come up from the bottom. Let's say I want to darken just this little foreground a little bit. Actually, that looks pretty good that way. Where it really gets powerful is when you start using the brush tool over here. But by the way, this doesn't have to be just exposure. Let's say, for example, I want to go back to this one and I want to change the hue of the sky a little bit. You can actually start messing around with the color, or I can increase or decrease the saturation. Anything you can think of. Yes, I could even mess with the color here. Where it really gets fun is you take it one step further and use the brush tool, the adjustment brush. And again, I can use left and right brackets or change the sizing over here. If I want to make, say, the face of this barn maybe a deeper red, I can just paint over top of it. And you can see it's starting to get slightly darker because right now it's just set for exposure. You can see as I drag this down, it will darken or lighten it. But I don't want to darken it. Maybe a little darker is good. I want to add more saturation to the front of the barn. So let's add a bunch there. So that's looking better. And you could go on and on. This is the stuff we're going to do in detail next week. But again, another cool thing is, let me bring my tools back. Another cool thing is that while I'm in here, after I'm done with this, I hit close. And I have this YY thing here. And YY means, well, let me see what I've just done. And I'll hit Shift Tab again, and you can see what you've done before and after. Let me swap those. I can also say, I want to see it split. So you can see it before and after, left to right, like that as well. So that's really handy when you're doing your edits to see where you ended up. Again, Shift Tab to get back. And well, after that, then we get into all this stuff down here. We get into camera calibration, lens corrections, etc. Oh, one handy thing, by the way, if you're working on a small monitor like I am, I'm working on my laptop right now. If you only want one of these to be open at a time, you can see right now as I click the next one, I have them automatically closing so that if I go up to tone curve, all the other tabs close. If you control click and you guys on a PC have to help me with this because I think it's right mouse click on a PC. If you control click in the space left of the title, not on the title itself, but to the left of it, you get this menu, and here's this mode called solo mode. And what solo mode does is each time you open a tab, it closes all the others. So that's kind of handy as well. So what I hope that I did today was whetted your appetite. We've got somewhat of a basis now for organizational stuff, and where it's really going to get fun now that we've got things organized and we've done some basic edits is we're going to do some more serious editing. And as an example, let's just show you this one. You might not have thought you could ever do something this in Lightroom. We're going to take an image like that and bring it to there in Lightroom. We're not even going to need Photoshop to do it. So that's the kind of stuff that we're going to cover next week. If you have something you really need that's really stumping you, send me an email at answers@xritephoto.com. I'll do my best to get you an answer. That's it for today. Thank you all for joining me. Hope to see you online again soon. And until next time, everyone have a great week. Bye-bye.